Hi, and welcome to Missions Played as Anyone in Watch Dogs Legion. My name is Yuri Horneman. I've been at Ubisoft Toronto since 2017. I was the team lead for missions technology and narrative systems on Watch Dogs Legion, and since this year, I'm a lead R&D program at Ubisoft LaForge. There are two other talks about Watch Dogs Legion at this conference. There is a talk during the main track on Census, the systemic backbone of Play as Anyone, and there's a talk on group AI behaviors during this AI summit. I'm going to be talking about three things. First, an overview of missions in Watch Dogs Legion, what our goals were, a high-level overview of the technology. I'm going to be talking about Play as Anyone, our core gameplay innovation and how it affected missions. And I'm going to be talking about missions as part of gameplay systems. So, Watch Dogs Legion. So the core innovation is Play as Anyone, meaning that every character in the open world of London is procedurally generated, and the player can recruit characters in the open world and then play as them. So there's no fixed main character. The game has a persistent social simulation that the player can interact with, and that system is called Census. And we do all that at AAA quality in terms of cinematics, story, missions, etc. Everyone is fully voiced. The cinematic sequences work with different audio and different sort of body height. So there was a lot of work that we put into that to make Play as Anyone work for the entire game. So missions are the most elaborate and highest quality interactive experience that we can generate in the game. They have arbitrary steps, they have branches and conditional logic, they can affect other gameplay systems, they can trigger any kind of narrative from lines of dialogue all the way to full cutscenes. We have powerful tools to create them, and they have sort of very few constraints. Our approach to developing them is we wanted to provide a coherent and robust system. So coherent means it should be easy to do things that go with the grain of the design and that are that make sense. And robust meaning it should be hard to make mistakes and easy to find out when you made a mistake. We wanted to provide a system that can do more than what mission and system designers want, but not too much. That's obviously a hard sort of judgment call to make, and we didn't always get it right, but in general it worked out. And we wanted to allow missions to be the building block for many different kinds of features and experiences. So that means putting a lot of effort into the configuration of mission types and individual missions, because we use missions in a lot of places. So this is a non-exhaustive list of mission types. There are single-player storylines, which usually people would think of as missions in a game, recruitment missions and revenge missions, which I'll go into more detail later, which are part of gameplay systems. Borough uprising missions, which are part of the system that allows the player to change the state of London one borough at a time. And then in multiplayer, we also have a lot of different mission types. And each mission type has its own logic for how they are started, how they are displayed in the UI. For some of these, the player might not even be aware they're playing a mission, or they're playing part of a mission. Tactical ops consist of multiple missions chained together without the player necessarily realizing that. And so that sort of shows what I mean by using missions as building blocks. Now, missions do need special tools and skills, and there's some overhead to use choosing missions, but we wanted to be sure that if someone wanted to implement a feature and it would make sense to use missions, that it would be possible. Now let's talk about the general design goals for missions in Legion. So missions never go back in time. We didn't want to do the thing that many games do where, you have some lethal challenge, you die, and then the game sort of rewinds time and pretends that what you just did never happened. That breaks suspension of disbelief. And also, our game, by definition, has diegetic extra lives. If you die, right, you can just recruit more people. So it didn't really make sense for our game. As a kind of sort of a consequence of that, we like to fail forward instead of just going like, nope, let's reset everything and do it again. We, as a rule, try to make it so that the mission would sort of deal with the player failure and move forward. We wanted to restrict Play as Anyone and Census as little as possible, and that had a lot of consequences, which I'll go into. Multiple missions can run at the same time, so that's not very special, but we can have the same mission run more than once at the same time, and that is, I think, reasonably unusual, and that has some technical implications. And finally, missions are there whether you're tracking them or not. So if a mission spawns a server and some guards, and the player doesn't choose to engage with that mission, if they don't track that mission, that server and those guards should still be there. That's the state of the world. We just want to be consistent. Sometimes you can try and be clever by, varying that, but we decided not to do that and just have everything be consistent for everyone. So in terms of technology, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because all of our systems were built on legacy technology that we've had for a long time, and so it's just not that interesting for other people to know exactly how we did it. Missions are represented by node graphs. There are 3 types of nodes. The first is what we call the gameplay beat node, so that is a node that will spawn some things in the world. It will monitor the player objectives, and it will handle signs of feedback. We have the logic nodes, and or queries, that kind of thing. And then finally, we have effect nodes, changing flags, affecting other systems. Now, as you can see, this is a graph for a real mission. These graphs can be pretty simple because we have, in fact, a second and much richer Lua-based visual scripting system. So this is more nitty-gritty. It's very robust. We've had it for a long time. But, it's very powerful. It has very good tool support. However, it doesn't replicate, and so this is mostly used in single player. Finally, some differences between missions in Watch Dogs 2 and Legion, mostly from a technological point of view. So we have the dynamically generated NPCs. The player can do more with those NPCs, and we have to be able to react to that. And that's the subject of the next section. We have dynamically picked locations. So for some mission types, we don't, hand pick the location where the player has to go. We sort of let the system pick that based on weighted logic to make that mission be more different each time you play it. We have reusable and configurable gameplay blocks called tropes, developed by our team in Paris. We have a much stronger online focus, and as I've shown before, we have more and different mission types. So let's talk about Play as Anyone. Whenever you proceduralize something or make something systemic, it's very common that content creators lose some kind of direct control. So we saw that with real-time lighting, for instance, on the original Splinter Cell. Because the real-time lighting is relevant to gameplay, the artists could no longer manually light rooms, and they couldn't use tricks, right? And that meant an adjustment, and their control became more indirect. Similar with physically based rendering, with having autonomous agents that you want to act in a very specific way. The more autonomous you make them, the harder it is to get them to look at the camera just right at the right moment. So this is a common phenomenon, and we ran into this with Legion, with missions and Play as Anyone. Because we decided by design that mission designers should not be able to specify exact actors. So they couldn't go like, yes, my mission needs a dude called Sean, who's 25 and has this such and so a profession, and this is their backstory, and this is what they look like. We took that away. And we leave that to Census. So Census generates a plausible inhabitant of London based on a small set of information like profession, income range, etc. And Census also simulates NPC schedules. So it determines where NPCs work, where they live, what their hobbies are. And that took some time for mission designers and writers to sort of think through and get used to. And it also took time to figure out how schedules would affect mission gameplay. The problem there, the additional problem, was that scheduling setup was meant to be done by 1-2 highly specialized game designers and not by any mission designer. It's a very complex system, and it was hard to make that easy to use for mission designers. So we tried a lot of things. We did a lot of experiments. We did a lot of play tests. In the end, regarding scheduling, we ended up with 2 modes. Either an NPC is following their generated schedule, we call that free roam, or they are forced to be where the gameplay beat tells them to be, and they're just there 24 hours. And because of how gameplay works, this was sort of the optimal compromise between the player experience, what makes narrative sense, and what the system wants to do. So this is how mission designers specify mission actors in the editor. They do that using tags. So they don't, here there's a mission actor called Macduff. That's just the name of the role, not the name of the character, because that gets generated. And so here we have a mission actor that we reference as Macduff, and we say, well, Macduff is his or her country of birth is Scotland, and their profession is private military. And so that's all done using tags. Each tag comes from a category. If we have, in something like this, if we have multiple tags within a category, that's treated as an or relationship. So we could have said Macduff should be from Scotland or from Wales. If the tags are from different categories, then that's an and relationship. So here we're saying Macduff needs to have, his country of birth needs to be Scotland, and their profession needs to be private military. And additionally, we can also do the same thing for sort of disallow tags. So we have, include and exclude lists. We have a very small set of predefined actors, such as our villains. That's where, the main characters of the story, it's very important that, we know their name, and we can really specify their appearance. So that's a jealously guarded set of exceptions handled by a completely different system. And villains are not seen in the open world and are not recruitable. So let's talk about edge cases, because that's really the meat of this section. So we, a couple of years before shipping, it became clear to us that certain things the player is able to do with the NPCs in the world would mess with missions in bad ways, and we needed to handle that, right? So what if the player wants to recruit an NPC who's part of a mission? This is something you can do. There are missions where you get told, like, well, there's this drug dealer, go neutralize them. If you go like, but I like the cut of this drug dealer's jib and I want him to join my resistance organization, then you can do so. So you can then start a recruitment on that person and, go for all the steps, and then they join you. And then they will go like, oh, and by the way, here's that information you needed in that other mission, and in some kind of narratively consistent way. And there's a whole bunch of these edge cases. And, our problem is that some missions cannot fail, so we can't just if a mission actor goes away, we have to deal with that. And missions have to make narrative sense. We don't care about sort of weird situations where someone makes a funny YouTube video, but they can still finish the game. That's fine, but it has to be not completely nonsensical, and especially people need to be able to finish the game. That's kind of important to us. So these edge cases were really, where the rubber hit the road, where it was a context surface between the systemic view of Census's social simulation and the offered view of our missions and our narrative. And remember that we wanted to restrict Census as little as possible. We wanted to stay as true as possible to play as anyone. So, there was an important balance that we had to find there. And the important thing here is not the solution that we ended up with, because, spoiler alert, we solved this and we shipped it. But the important thing is the process we went through. The important thing is that we took this seriously, and we kept taking it seriously all along during development. So we carefully designed rules for each edge case. We then, we talked to mission designers, system designers, programmers, and then, leads, and then directors, and then all the way up to Clint Hocking, our creative director. Because everybody had to agree that this was sort of the most optimal compromise, and everybody had to agree that they had to deal with the consequences of the compromise we found. And we had to keep revisiting those rules whenever the recruitment logic changed, because there was, that being the core of what was special about Legion, there was a lot of iteration happening in our recruitment logic. So getting everyone to understand and buy into those rules took time. But by taking it seriously, we developed a shared mindset and approach, and that in the end made it easy, right? Everybody had sort of thought about it, and they knew how it empowered and constrained them, and then making tweaks to it as the game progressed was easy. So, having said that, we found some systemic solutions to some of these edge cases, but there was no magical technological solution for how to react to all possible ways that mission actors can go away. There were just cases where, like in this case, there's no, we couldn't extract enough patterns from all missions and all possible missions that we might want to make. We couldn't automatically, it depended too much on the mission, the player experience during that mission, and the narrative. So we had to build tools and fallbacks to allow mission designers to handle these edge cases themselves in missions. And additionally, there were just some situations in missions where it was like, well, if in this brief period of time the player kills this NPC, or they get a bus hits them, then there's no good, or the player recruits them, right? There's no good way for the mission to continue and for it to make narrative sense. It would be very costly to do it using the tools we have, or it would require a lot of lines of dialogue that would be bad to make. And so we had to allow mission designers to make actors unrecruitable. And so we were handing people the keys to break the game's core promise at will. And that was, again, that needed discussing, why can't we handle this systemically? And that was sort of part of that compromise that I mentioned earlier. Now, these restrictions, so you can see that here, this is one of those nodes. You can say, this mission actor MacDuff, I want to make them unrecruitable. And as soon as this node has run, that actor cannot be recruited. Now, these restrictions are not stored in a flag in census data, right, in the runtime data for this NPC. They're actually stored in the mission actor data that's part of the mission data structure. And that was important because it meant that the restrictions are automatically tied to the lifetime of the mission. So when census asks, hey, mission system, is it okay if we recruit this person? We iterate over all running missions. We go well, is this NPC you're asking about part of this mission? And then is that flag set? And that is, slightly more elaborate than just setting a flag, but it meant that the restriction, sort of goes away when a mission is over, and there's no possibility of a mission designer making a mistake. They forget to put in the make actor recruitable again node, and then the actor is locked for the duration of the game. That would be very bad, right? So we avoided that by scoping the restriction to the mission. And again, that's part of us trying to be as minimally restrictive as possible. The next tool we build is the actor monitor node. So you put it in your node graph, you select the actor you're interested in, and then as soon as this node gets activated, it will continuously look at the condition of that mission actor. And when that condition, when a condition appears, like they get injured, they get arrested, they're recruited, whatever it is, the node will trigger one of its output ports and then stop monitoring. We never cared about conditions disappearing. That was just not something that ever happened. Similarly, we have the actor query node. That effectively, in terms of code, is the same code as a monitor node, but instead of continuously monitoring, it does the check once and then, exits. So unlike the monitor node, it has no lifetime. It just does the check and boom. And so this behaves more like an if statement, whereas the monitor node, in terms of metaphor, right, it behaves more like a scoped exception handler. Finally, we had fallbacks. So, what if a mission designer makes some last-minute change and they forget to adjust their monitor nodes and their reactions? So we added some additional logic for every gameplay beat node. We look at all the actors that are required for that gameplay beat. And if any one of them is invalid, meaning they've been recruited or injured or whatever it is, we don't even spawn anything. We just immediately fail the node, and then all of our missions are built so that we have to deal with failure all over the place, and that means that the system don't get stuck in a weird place, where like you have to neutralize someone who's already dead, which could be very bad. But instead, the mission sort of continues logically. So that was sort of an additional fallback that we implemented. So finally, I want to talk about missions as part of gameplay systems. Recruitment missions are really rich narrative added to the recruitment loop. The way the recruitment loop works at a very high level is the player profiles someone on the street. We then generate that person based on what they look like. And as a part of that, we also pick a recruitment mission. So we look at the restrictions imposed by the character. We look at which missions the player has seen recently. So we have some history there, some weighting, and then we attach that mission to the character. And then when the player goes up and talks to them, that's when we actually start the mission, and then the player goes and solves that problem. And so what's interesting there is that the NPC the player is trying to recruit becomes a mission actor, right? And I'll go into more detail on that in a second. And we have a second system called revenge missions. And there we wanted to make something where we wanted to treat the player's actions as a plot hook to trigger a mission type. And so at a very high level, how it works is every once in a while, we ask sensors like, hey, is there someone out there that you know of who really hates DedSec, the player's resistance organization? And by really hates, we mean, you have messed with them, you have beaten them up, or you have messed with their blackmail scheme so many times that their affinity towards DedSec is at a level where it's just unrecoverable. There's nothing you can do to ever make them like you and join you again, right? And if Census goes like, yes, I know someone who hates DedSec, then we go like, okay, well, that's the aggressor. Great. And then we go, we look at the aggressor's memories and we go like, do you have a negative memory about someone who is currently not doing anything important? And when we find someone like that, a memory and then that person, then we go like, okay, so this operative, that's the victim. And then we trigger a revenge mission, and those, the aggressor and the victim become the mission actors. And the way revenge missions work is that, the aggressor, you need to find the aggressor because they have kidnapped your operative, the victim. And it's a pretty rare feature. It takes a bit of time before that starts kicking in, and it doesn't trigger all the time. But we found that it tends to really delight players when they suddenly go like, hey, wait a minute, what is this mission? Like someone kidnapped one of my people? And then they really like it, this feeling that the world is really reacting to what they're doing with a very rich narrative because it's a mission. And, it really feels like the system pushing back at the player. And then, often players then go like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, crash my car into, people so many times or whatever it is they do. So what is interesting about that is that, for the recruitment and revenge missions, there are some mission actors we shouldn't generate, right? Because by definition, those people already exist. Like we want to take existing people. And so instead we inject them. And initially, when we built recruitment missions, that was just sort of something that was hard-coded. That was like an additional parameter, like when you start a mission, like, oh, and this is the recruitment target. And then we sort of could take that and go like, oh, is this a recruitment mission? Okay, let's take the recruitment target and put that in. But then what we did a little bit later is we generalized that. So when you start a mission, you can pass a list of actors and a list of locations. And so you say that, the actor with the role name McDuff, it will be this NPC, or, more realistically, the actor with the role name Aggressor will be this NPC, and the actor with the role name Victim will be this NPC because, operatives are NPCs as well. And we do the same with locations. And then during the creation process, instead of asking Sensus to make us a fresh aggressor, instead we inject those people. And that's an example of us looking at where the ideas were going and then delivering something that was slightly more than what people wanted. Because we did that generalization, we changed that architecture before revenge missions were an idea. But then later when people were like, hey, we could do revenge missions, we were like, well, that's not really easy because we've made it possible to just, inject these people. And so the actual revenge mission logic took about 2 days to make for like the first prototype. And you can think of this as the mission taking parameters, and especially with, repeatable, more systemic missions, we found this to be a useful metaphor in general to think of the mission is a function that I'm calling and I'm providing certain parameters. And it was, as we worked on these mission types that were part of gameplay systems, we noticed that the relationship between gameplay system and mission was sort of inverted. Normally, a mission sort of goes in and goes like, okay, hey, you gameplay systems, I need you to spawn this, I need you to, to suppress this, and I need this rule to be different, right? Because they're sort of exotic. In this case, it's more the gameplay system go like, hey, mission, I need a mission with the following people and the following types. So that was kind of interesting to see how that worked in terms of the code architecture. And then the other thing we noticed is that system designers and mission designers think and work differently. So mission designers, their job is to make the funnest and most remarkable mission they can. And they don't care that much about, whether it's systemic or, whether it, fits super well with the other missions, right? They are focused on their mission. With these systemic mission types like recruitment and revenge, we sort of had to pull back a little bit. Obviously, we still wanted the missions to be fun and cool, but we couldn't have like, blow up the Big Ben to get your operative back, because if you then play 50 hours, you do that 5 times, it gets a bit weird. So we had to sort of make them a little bit more generic. At the same time, system designers, we sort of had to stop them from over-specifying missions in their design documents. We were like, no, just sort of say generally what the mission is about and let the mission designers be creative. That's their job. So it was sort of interesting being in between those two different the design profiles. Finally, I want to sort of contextualize what we've done. So recruitment missions are like storylets. Storylets are a concept from narrative systems, a pretty common term. I've given some information. If you want to find out more about them, you can look on Emily Short's blog. She has a lot of content about them. And basically, for these purposes, a storylet is a piece of content with some requirements, some prerequisites. And when the prerequisites are true, then that content gets activated or played. And that's kind of what we did with recruitment missions, right? Because they have some requirements, and not every recruitment mission can be applied to every character. And so what's interesting there is that there are a lot of storylet engines out there. There are a lot of technical approaches. There are a lot of creative approaches, and that's something that we could look at and see, how can we do that, more of this in future games. And similarly, revenge missions are a form of story sifting. This is a concept from Narrative Systems Academia. I've given some citations if you want to look that up. And story sifting basically means taking a social simulation and then running a pattern matching logic on it. And then when you find a certain pattern that, a certain match, then you instantiate some bit of story, or in our case, a mission, and you inject the bits you found in the simulation into that. And that's literally what we're doing with revenge missions. Now, when we started working on revenge missions, I wasn't aware of story sifting, but now there's a lot of active research happening. People are looking into how can we sort of generalize this instead of having hard-coded logic like we had for revenge missions. People are looking into can we use formal logic and logic programming to express these patterns. So that's also something interesting to look at, and to look at whether there are things in academia that we could be using in future games. And that's it. Thank you very much. This is the team that built all this, plus many, many other people. Obviously, not just these 6 people. And yeah, thanks for listening.